Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the world of construction project management.
Okay.
We've got a whole bunch of sources here, blueprints, process breakdowns. We've even got a subcontractor scorecard.
Interesting.
It's all geared towards showing us how a project goes from like an idea in the client's head to a real standing structure.
Right.
And to help us make sense of it all, we've got an expert in the field with us.
Well, I don't know about expert, but I've certainly been around the block a few times. What fascinates me about construction project management is that it really is a balance between planning and adapting.
Mhm.
I mean, you can have the most detailed blueprints, but things always come up. The real world throws you a curveball, and how you manage those curveballs well, that's what separates the great projects from the ones that, well, don't go so well.
So not just building expertise, but like crisis management too.
You could see that.
Our sources really break down each phase of a project. And I got to say, one thing that jumped out at me was this focus on documentation.
Oh, absolutely.
And I don't just mean having the plans, but daily logs, meeting minutes. They even talk about tracking every permit application. Why is that so crucial?
Let me give you an example.
Okay.
One project I was on, a tiny little detail in a daily log, it actually saved us from a huge legal mess.
Really?
Yeah, so a subcontractor claimed they had finished a task by a certain date. But our log showed a different story. Simple note, but it stopped a lawsuit right there, saved the project a ton of money.
Wow. So those logs are like an insurance policy.
You got it.
Okay, so speaking of avoiding headaches, our deep dive starts at the very beginning, project initiation and planning.
Right. The foundation of everything.
Lots of talk about communication and, of course, all that meticulous planning.
Mhm.
But what's the main goal here? What are we trying to achieve in this phase?
Imagine building a house. You wouldn't just start laying bricks without knowing how many rooms you want. Right? This phase is about laying the groundwork. It all starts with those design meetings with the client.
Hmm.
And it goes way beyond just aesthetics. It's about understanding what they really want, their vision. But at the same time, you've got to balance that with practical stuff. Can we actually build it? Does it fit the budget?
Makes sense.
And maybe most importantly, you've got to figure out their hot buttons.
Hot buttons, is that like construction slang or something?
Not really slang, it's just what our source material calls them.
Okay.
It means figuring out what the client really cares about. Are they obsessed with the timeline? Maybe they're willing to splurge on eco-friendly materials. Understanding those priorities shapes how you approach the whole project.
So you're not just building a structure, you're building a relationship too.
It's a partnership.
Okay. But it's not all smooth sailing, right?
Oh.
I see our sources also talking about risk assessment. Things like labor shortages, supply chain issues. Sounds kind of scary.
Yeah, and for good reason. I mean, you have to anticipate these things. For example, the source material mentions a project that got delayed because of a lumber shortage.
Oh, wait.
The project manager had to scramble to find new suppliers, redo contracts, all that.
Not fun. So how do you plan for that kind of stuff? It's like predicting the future.
Well, you don't need a crystal ball, but you do need to understand the context of the project.
Okay.
Where are we building? What's the labor market like? Are there any known supply chain problems? It's about asking those tough questions up front and then having some backup plans.
So you're always thinking, what if?
Exactly. You can't eliminate every risk, but you can minimize their impact. Like in that lumber shortage example, the project manager could have had multiple suppliers lined up in advance, or maybe thought about different materials.
So you're building in some flexibility.
You got it.
Okay, so we've got the dream, the plan, and hopefully a plan for when things go wrong. What's next?
Well, before we start building, there's this critical stage a lot of people forget: pre-construction procurement.
Pre-construction procurement. Sounds kind of administrative, but our sources are saying it's make or break. What's the big deal?
Think about it like running a marathon.
Okay.
You wouldn't show up without the right shoes, right?
Right.
Pre-construction procurement is about getting everything ready before you start running. It all begins with permits and approvals. We actually have a checklist in our materials that goes through the whole process.
Ooh, checklists, love those.
Oh.
And it says that if you don't get these permits on time, you could face some serious delays. They even talk about tracking the status of those applications. So no waiting around for a phone call.
Exactly. I once had a project where a zoning permit got held up for weeks.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was a nightmare. Cost the project a ton of money. A good project manager is proactive, they're calling, emailing, whatever it takes to keep those permits moving.
So you're not just managing a project, you're managing the bureaucracy too.
Sadly, yes.
Okay, so what about contracts and agreements with all the subcontractors. It seems like our sources are really picky about defining the scope of work and getting those agreements signed on time.
Yeah, well, think about it. If you hire someone to paint your house and you don't tell them what painting the house means, you're going to have problems, right?
Out. Right.
Scope definition is about getting rid of any confusion, making sure everyone's on the same page. And then there's timing. Let's say you've got your materials, your permits, everything ready, but you're waiting on the electrician to sign the contract. That delay can throw the whole project off.
It's like a domino effect. One thing leads to another.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've navigated the permits, the contracts, avoided those bureaucratic nightmares. Are we ready to build now?
Almost. But before we actually, get our hands dirty on the site, there's one more piece we need to talk about, the construction project kickoff.
Okay.
This sets the tone for the whole thing, really gets everyone on the same page before we get started.
So it's like the pep rally before the big game.
Exactly. Everyone gets their jerseys on, learns the playbook, and just like any big game, preparation is key. It all starts with the estimator and the sales team. They need to review the entire project, make sure they understand all the details. Our source construction project kickoff process, it really stresses how important this step is.
I see. So it's all about making sure there are no surprises later on.
Right. Because any miscommunication now, well, it can cause major headaches down the line. The estimator and sales team, they really have to be in sync.
Got it. So they're essentially creating the blueprint for the actual kickoff meeting.
Yeah, exactly. Making sure they've got all the information they need to lead the team effectively.
Okay. So what happens next?
Well, once the estimator and sales team have done their prep work, it's time to assemble the dream team, project managers, site supervisors, the subcontractors, everyone who will be involved in making this project a reality.
Sounds like it takes a village to raise a building.
It really does. And just like any great team, you need to define everyone's roles and responsibilities from the very beginning. Who's in charge of what? Who reports to whom?
Right. That makes sense.
These details need to be crystal clear to avoid confusion. And our source also mentions developing a preliminary schedule at this stage.
Yeah.
And get this, they say it's important to collaborate with the client on that timeline.
Okay. Why is that so important?
It all comes back to managing expectations. Remember those hot buttons we talked about?
Yeah.
Well, if a client's top priority is a tight timeline, they need to understand anything that might affect that.
I see. So it's all about transparency, making sure everyone knows the potential roadblocks.
Exactly. And while we're talking about roadblocks, this is also when we start thinking about those inevitable risks. Construction is a complex business. Things don't always go according to plan.
So it's not just planning for what should happen, but also what could go wrong. What are some of the risks they need to be thinking about?
Well, our source material lists a few common ones. Material lead times, for instance. Some materials, like special windows or finishes, they can take weeks, even months to arrive. If we don't include those in our schedule, we'll fall behind.
Oh, I see. It's like having your whole team ready to build,
Yeah.
but the windows are stuck on a ship somewhere.
Exactly. And then there's the labor market. Finding skilled workers can be a real challenge these days. If you don't have the right people at the right time, the whole project gets delayed. And of course, let's not forget about Mother Nature. Weather can be a huge factor in construction. Rain, snow, even extreme heat can throw everything off.
It's like you're managing a team, a budget, and the weather all at the same time.
That's construction for you.
Okay, so we have the schedule, identify the risks, and hopefully some strategies for dealing with them. So is it time for the kickoff meeting now?
You got it. This is where we officially get everyone together, the client, subcontractors, the whole team, and we kick things off. And just like any meeting, you need a good agenda.
I imagine it's even more important when you have so many people in the room, each with their own expertise. What kind of things are typically on the agenda for this kickoff meeting?
Well, it usually starts with a project overview, setting the scene. The estimator or someone from the sales team typically leads this part. They explain the client's vision, what we're trying to achieve, the overall scope of the project.
Okay, so you're painting the picture for everyone, getting them excited about the project.
Right. Then we dive into the details. First up is the contract. We review all those important terms and conditions, highlight any specific requirements that everyone needs to be aware of.
So you're making sure everyone's crystal clear on the contract, no surprises later on.
Precisely. And while we're on the topic of clarity, this is also the stage where we review the subcontractor selections. We introduce each subcontractor, explain why we chose them, highlight their expertise.
Okay, so it's like a meet and greet for all the key players.
Exactly. Then we move on to the project schedule. We present that preliminary schedule we developed, outlining all the major milestones, any potential challenges, and making sure everyone understands their role in keeping things on track.
The schedule is the roadmap, so everyone needs to know where they fit in.
Absolutely. Our source material also mentions the importance of a plans overview during this kickoff meeting. This is where we really dig into those blueprints, walk through all the details, and answer any questions the team might have.
So it's not just about passively looking at drawings, but really understanding them.
Exactly. And then we need to establish clear communication protocols. How will we share information? How often will we meet? Who has the authority to make decisions?
So it's about setting those ground rules and preventing miscommunication.
Exactly. And of course, we can't forget about safety. We review all the site-specific safety rules, outline any required training, and really emphasize the importance of maintaining a safe work environment for everyone.
Safety first.
Always. And finally, we revisit those potential risks we identified earlier. This is a chance to discuss those mitigation strategies in more detail, get input from the entire team, and make sure everyone is on the same page about how we'll handle those challenges if they arise.
So it's not just a presentation, but a real discussion.
Exactly. The more minds we have on a problem, the better.
Makes sense. So our kickoff meeting is done. Everyone's pumped and ready to go. Can we head to the site now?
Not quite. There are a few things we need to take care of before we break ground. Preparation, remember.
Right, of course. So what's on the post-kickoff checklist?
First, we need to distribute those meeting minutes to everyone. This ensures that everyone has a written record of the key decisions, action items, and deadlines. It's all about accountability. And then the project manager and the site supervisor finalize that project schedule, incorporating any feedback from the kickoff meeting, confirming material lead times, and making sure the timeline is realistic.
So it's taking that draft schedule and making it official.
Exactly. And once that's done, we start mobilizing resources, securing permits, ordering materials, confirming equipment rentals. We need all the pieces in place before we start building.
Like assembling a giant puzzle.
I like that.
Okay, so permits are secured, materials are ordered, equipment is reserved. What else?
One more step before we hand over the site. Those pre-mobilization meetings. It's essential to ensure that our internal team is aligned and that our subcontractors are crystal clear on the expectations.
Okay, so it's like one last check-in before the big game starts.
Exactly. We usually have two pre-mobilization meetings. The first one is internal, just the project manager, site supervisor, and estimator. They go over the plans one last time, double-check the contracts, and make sure the procurement schedule is on track.
It's like their final quality check.
Right. We need to make sure everything's in place so no one's waiting around on day one.
Time is money.
Exactly. And once the internal team is ready, we bring in the subcontractors for their own pre-mobilization meeting.
So this is where they get all the details, ask their questions, make sure they're clear on what's expected of them.
Precisely. We explain the project scope, walk them through the timeline, highlight any specific challenges or considerations, and reiterate those safety protocols. It's their chance to get all the information they need to hit the ground running.
Okay, so internal team, subcontractors, everyone's aligned. Anything else before we hand over the site?
Actually, yes. One more crucial meeting. It's time for that pre-construction client check-in.
Back to the client, making sure they're happy and informed before we break ground. What's the focus of this meeting?
It's about ensuring the client is fully on board with the final plan and ready for the construction phase. We present the final budget, the detailed schedule, and an overview of the procurement status.
One last progress report before the real action begins.
Exactly. And this is also where the client gives their final approval on those finalized plans. We want to avoid any, wait, I thought we were getting granite countertops situations once construction is underway.
Right.
Yeah.
Surprises are good for birthdays, not construction projects.
Exactly. And once the client has signed off, we take this opportunity to set those all-important expectations for the construction phase.
Okay, so what does that involve?
We give them a realistic preview of what to expect. This might include outlining the key milestones, explaining how communication will work during construction, and highlighting any points where their input will be needed.
So it's about managing expectations, making sure they understand that even with the best plans, things can change.
Precisely. Transparency and communication are key.
It sounds like with all these meetings and preparations, you've really set the stage for a smooth and successful project.
That's the goal. A well-executed pre-construction phase can make a huge difference in how the entire project unfolds.
So now we can finally grab those hard hats and head to the construction site.
We're ready to build. but for insurance purposes,
Yeah.
and also to see if there are any patterns, any trends that might tell us we need to improve safety even more.
So it's all about learning from what happens and getting better.
Right.
Okay, so those daily logs sound like they're really important for this whole active construction phase. They're keeping track of the progress, safety, materials.
Yeah, it's a lot to keep track of.
Is there anything else that's really important for managing things on the site day to day?
One thing that often gets overlooked is waste management.
Oh, right. You don't want to just have piles of trash everywhere.
Exactly. Construction sites, they generate a ton of debris, and it's important to have a system for handling it properly, being environmentally responsible.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This might mean sorting materials for recycling or making sure hazardous waste is disposed of correctly.
Okay, so we've got our daily operations running smoothly, those logs are filled out, and we're not creating a mountain of garbage. What's next on the list?
Well, it's time to zoom out a little bit from the day-to-day and look at the bigger picture.
Okay.
That's where those weekly progress reviews come in. This is where the project manager, the site supervisor, and really importantly, the client get together to see how things are going.
I bet those walkthroughs with the client are pretty exciting. They finally get to see their vision coming to life.
Oh, absolutely. It's more than just admiring the progress, though. It's a chance to point out any potential problems, answer questions, and make sure everyone's on the same page.
So building trust, basically.
Exactly. And it's also a time for the client to give feedback, maybe request some changes.
Oh, so those change orders can come up here too.
Definitely. And any feedback or requests from the client, they get documented carefully, along with any impact on the budget or the schedule. Transparency is key.
So it's not just about those visual inspections during the walkthroughs, right?
Yeah.
What else happens in these weekly meetings?
We look at the schedule really closely, comparing where we are to where we're supposed to be.
Okay.
This helps us catch any potential delays early on. And of course, it's a chance to talk about any issues that have come up during the week, whether it's a material shortage, a problem with a subcontractor, or some unexpected issue on the site. We use those meetings to figure out solutions.
It's like proactive problem solving.
Exactly. And that problem solving, well, it often involves some brainstorming, some creative thinking, and sometimes a little bit of negotiation.
Sure.
The important thing is to get everyone involved, the subcontractors, the client, everyone, to find a solution that works for everyone.
So it's all about teamwork.
It is.
Okay. So we've got those site walkthroughs, the schedule reviews, the problem solving sessions. Is there anything else on the agenda for these weekly meetings?
We can't forget about the money. Construction projects are businesses, and we have to keep a close eye on the budget.
Right. Got to make sure the project stays profitable. How do you guys usually handle the financial stuff in these weekly meetings?
Well, our source material stresses the importance of a weekly financial review for each project. The project manager usually takes the lead on this, and sometimes someone from the finance team joins in.
So it's all about comparing what's actually being spent to the budget and making sure everything's on track.
Exactly. And one thing we often look for is underbilling.
Underbilling.
Yeah. It's basically when we haven't billed the client for all the work that's been done, maybe because of a mistake, a delay in processing invoices, or even a disagreement about what work's been completed.
Oh, I see. So it's important to catch that early on, make sure you're getting paid for the work.
Right. Those weekly reviews help us find and fix any underbilling problems.
Okay.
And of course, we also update that important WIP tracker.
WIP tracker. What's that stand for?
Work in progress. It's a tool for keeping track of the project's financial health. Basically, it tracks how much work has been done that we haven't billed the client for yet.
So it tells you where you stand financially at any given moment.
Exactly. By keeping that tracker up to date, the project manager can see how profitable the project is, forecast future revenue, and spot any potential cash flow problems.
It's like having your finger on the pulse of the project's finances.
You got it.
Okay, so we've got the daily operations, the weekly reviews, the financials all in order. What else is crucial during this active construction phase?
Well, we can't forget about the subcontractors. They're the ones who really make it all happen, They bring all the specialized skills and expertise that turns the plans into a real building.
Right, they're a vital part of the team.
Absolutely. And managing them well, that's key for keeping the project on schedule, on budget, and ensuring the quality is top-notch. Communication is probably the most important thing. Our sources emphasize having those weekly subcontractor meetings. It's a time for the project manager and site supervisor to connect with the subcontractors, review their progress, address any concerns, and answer any questions.
So it's like a dedicated time to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. But it's not just about talking. It's also important to be monitoring how well the subcontractors are doing.
Okay, so how do you track their performance?
It's usually a mix of watching them work, looking at their progress reports, and sometimes even formal evaluations.
Uh-huh.
We're looking at things like whether they're meeting deadlines, the quality of their work, how responsive they are to communication, and just their overall professionalism.
So you're looking at the whole picture, not just one thing.
Right. And then we use that information to give them feedback, help them improve, and also to decide who we want to work with on future projects.
And of course, making sure they get paid on time. That's got to be important too.
Oh, absolutely. Especially for the smaller subcontractors, they rely on that cash flow. Usually it involves a few steps:
Mhm.
verifying they did the work, approving invoices, and then getting those payments processed quickly.
So no one's left waiting for their money.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have our subcontractors working hard, the budget is under control, things are moving along. But what happens when things change? You
Mhm.
know, like those unexpected problems or issues that always seem to pop up in construction.
That's where change order management comes in.
Oh, yeah, those change orders. I feel like I've heard horror stories about them. What usually triggers a change order?
It could be a lot of things. Sometimes it's the client, they decide they want to add something, upgrade a material, or change the design. Other times it's because we discover something unexpected on the site. Maybe we hit rock where we expected soil, or we find some utilities that weren't on the original plans.
So you have to be ready to adjust.
Definitely. And managing those change orders well, that's really important for keeping the project on track and on budget, and also for keeping the client happy.
So how do you manage change orders effectively? What's the process?
Our source material outlines a pretty clear process. First, any change, no matter where it comes from, it gets documented really thoroughly. We describe exactly what the change is, why it's needed, and how it might affect the schedule or the budget.
Okay, so you're making sure everyone's on the same page right from the start.
Right. Then that change request, it gets reviewed internally. Yeah. Usually by the project manager, the estimator, and maybe the site supervisor. They look at whether it's even possible to make the change, how much it will cost, how long it will take, and whether it fits with the overall project goals.
So it's a team effort.
It is. And if they give it the thumbs up, then the change order goes to the client for their approval. They have the final say.
So the client gets to decide whether they want to proceed with the change.
Exactly. And once they approve, then we put the change into action. We update the schedule, the budget, and any plans that are affected.
So everyone knows what's going on.
Transparency is really important.
Okay, so change orders can be a headache, but it sounds like you have a system for handling them.
We try our best.
Speaking of making sure things are done right, what about quality control and inspections?
Ah, yes. Quality control, that's all about making sure the work is done right, meeting the standards, making sure everything matches the specs. The site supervisor usually takes a lead on this, doing daily walkthroughs to spot any issues and making sure the work is up to par.
So they're the ones making sure everything's done correctly.
Right. The project manager might also do inspections periodically just to have another set of eyes on things. And then you have those third-party inspections.
Oh, right. Those are important, right?
Definitely. Those are usually done by licensed professionals, experts in things like electrical, plumbing, or structural engineering. They're the ones who make sure everything's up to code and safe.
Okay, so you have different levels of inspection to make sure everything's good.
You got it.
What about the client during this phase? How do you keep them in the loop?
Well, communication is key. Our sources really stress the importance of regular updates for the client, usually weekly. We send them written reports, progress photos, sometimes even video walkthroughs.
I bet they love seeing those photos and videos,
Yeah.
but it's not always about good news, right?
Of course not. We also use those updates to talk about any problems or concerns. It's all about keeping things transparent and making sure the client feels heard. And speaking of keeping the client happy, managing the budget is a big part of that.
Yeah, no one likes unexpected costs.
Exactly. So we track the budget very carefully throughout the construction phase. The project manager and the finance team work together to monitor spending, compare it to the original budget, and look for any red flags.
So if you find something's over budget, what happens?
Well, we dig deeper to understand why. Maybe there's a way to cut costs somewhere else, or maybe we need to have a conversation with the client about adjusting the scope of the project. Transparency is really important here, too.
So it's all about being proactive and open about the money.
Definitely. And of course, those change orders, they can really affect the budget too. The estimator has to calculate how much those changes will cost and update the budget accordingly.
So you're constantly adjusting the budget as the project moves along?
You could say that, but it's not just about staying within budget. It's also about looking for ways to save money where we can. That might mean negotiating with suppliers, finding ways to use less material, or figuring out more efficient ways to do the work.
So it's like finding ways to work smarter.
Exactly. And a lot of those ideas, they actually come from the people out on the construction site, the ones who are doing the work. They often see things that we might miss from the office.
Makes sense.
So we encourage them to speak up and share their ideas.
Okay, so we've got the budget under control, quality inspections are happening, the client is happy. What else do we need to think about?
Well, there's the whole logistics side of things, all the materials and resources that are moving in and out of the construction site. It can be a bit of a juggling act.
I bet.
Inventory control is really important. We keep track of everything that's on site, to prevent waste, minimize losses, and make sure we have what we need when we need it. It's kind of like keeping a well-stocked pantry.
Makes sense. And what about those big pieces of equipment like the excavators and cranes?
For those, it's all about managing resources. We have to schedule them carefully so we don't have crews waiting around for something they need.
Right. And then there are those materials that take a long time to arrive.
Exactly. We have to keep an eye on those lead times, communicate any delays to the subcontractors, and be ready to adjust the schedule if necessary. Flexibility is key.
It's like a constant game of adaptation.
It is. And speaking of things you have to adapt to, we can't forget about risk management. There are always risks in construction, things that can throw the project off track.
Yeah, we talked about some of those earlier, like labor shortages and supply chain issues. What are some others?
Well, the weather is a big one. Rain, snow, extreme heat. All of those can cause delays and create safety hazards. So we have to be prepared for anything.
Right, you can't control the weather.
Yeah.
So how do you manage all these risks?
The project manager and the site supervisor, they're always on the lookout for potential problems. They have to think ahead, come up with plans to deal with those risks, and take action before things get out of hand.
So it's about being proactive.
Exactly. And as with everything else, documentation is key. We keep track of all the risks, what we're doing to mitigate them, and any incidents or near misses that happen.
So you can learn from what happens and prevent problems in the future.
Right.
It sounds like you really have to be on top of things during this active construction phase.
There's a lot going on.
And communication seems to be crucial for making sure everything runs smoothly.
Oh, absolutely. Our sources really stress the importance of regular reporting, both within the team and to the client. Weekly progress reports, financial updates, safety summaries, change order logs. There's a lot of information flying around.
And it has to be clear and easy to understand.
Definitely. Technology has been a game changer for this. Construction project management software. It helps us manage all the information, track progress, share documents, and keep everyone in the loop.
So it's all about using the right tools to make communication easier.
You got it.
And now, as the construction phase wraps up, I imagine all those reports and that documentation become even more important.
They do. It's all about making sure everything's in order for the final handover to the client. And that brings us to the last stage of the project.
Closeout.
The grand finale.
It is.
So what do we need to know about managing this closeout phase? Our source, Main Construction Project Closeout Process, it lays out a series of steps to make sure this final stage goes smoothly. But before we even think about handing over the keys, the first thing the project manager has to do is make sure we've done everything we said we would do in the contract.
Okay, so dotting the I's and crossing the T's.
Exactly. We go over the contract, make sure we've identified all the warranties, guarantees, and punch list items, and confirm that everything meets the client's expectations. It's all about being thorough.
And once the project manager has confirmed all that, what's next?
Well, it's time to start planning the closeout meeting. We bring in the client, the site supervisor, and any key subcontractors who are still involved.
So everyone gets together one last time.
Right. We go over the closeout process, make sure everyone knows what needs to happen and when and who's responsible for what. But before that meeting, we have to do some prep work. We need to check in with each subcontractor, make sure they've finished their work, submitted their drawings and warranties, all that good stuff.
So it's like checking them off the list one by one.
Exactly. And once that's done, then comes the punch list.
Yes, the famous punch list. I always hear about this.
It's basically a list of all the little things that need to be fixed or finished before the project is truly done. We walk through the entire project with the client and look for anything that's not quite right. Could be a scratch on a countertop, a door that sticks, anything like that.
So it's a final quality check with the client.
It is. And as we find these punch list items, we write them down carefully. We note where they are, what the problem is, and who needs to fix it.
Okay, so it's like a to-do list for the final touches.
You got it.
So who's responsible for getting all those things done?
The project manager, they're the ones who assign the tasks, usually to the subcontractors, and set deadlines.
Making sure those loose ends get tied up.
Exactly. And once it's all done, we have a final inspection with the client to make sure they're happy.
Okay, the punch list is done. The client is happy. What happens next?
Then it's time for the really final inspections. First, there's the final walkthrough with everyone involved, the client, the project manager, the site supervisor. We make sure everything matches the contract and the quality standards.
So you're making sure everything's as it should be.
Right. And then comes the system testing. This is where we make sure everything actually works. Lights, plumbing, heating, cooling, all of it.
So the building is ready to be lived in.
Exactly. And there might also be some inspections required by the city or other agencies like the fire marshal.
Oh, right, to get those final approvals.
Right. The project manager handles all that, makes sure the inspections happen and any problems get fixed.
Okay, so once all those inspections are done, what's next?
Now comes the documentation and handover. This is where we gather all those important records. As-built drawings, warranties, operation manuals, and copies of all the permits and approvals. We put it all together in a package for the client.
So it's like giving them everything they need to know about their new building.
Exactly. It's also important to make sure all the final payments have been made, and we have those lien releases from everyone.
Lien releases?
Yeah. A lien is basically a legal claim someone can put on a property if they haven't been paid for their work. We want to make sure all the subcontractors and suppliers have been paid so there are no loose ends.
So it's all clean and clear.
Right. Okay, so the payments are done, the paperwork is in order. Are we ready for that final meeting with the client?
I think so. This is it, the moment you hand over the keys.
It is. It's a time to celebrate, reflect on how the project went, and answer any final questions. We might talk about what went well, thank the client for working with us, and recognize the hard work of the whole team.
So it's a happy occasion.
It is. And then, of course, we do that final walkthrough with the client, show them all the features, make sure they're completely satisfied.
That must be a really rewarding moment for everyone.
It really is. We might also show them how to operate some of the systems, like the heating and cooling. And once that's done, the client gives their final sign-off.
The official stamp of approval.
You got it. The project is officially complete. We hand over the keys, and the client can finally move in and enjoy their new space.
What a journey. But wait, even though the client has moved in, the work isn't completely done for the project team, is it?
You're right. There are still a few things to take care of even after the project is officially closed.
What are some of those things?
Well, we have to keep an eye on those warranties. If something breaks within the warranty period, we need to make sure it gets fixed. And it's also a good time to check in with the client, get their feedback on how the project went, and see if there's anything we can do better next time.
So it's a chance to learn and improve.
Exactly. And we also do an internal review of the project. The team gets together and talks about what worked well, what didn't, and what we can learn from the experience. We look closely at the budget, the schedule, everything, to see if we can find ways to be even more efficient and effective in the future. And part of that is reviewing the performance of the subcontractors.
Right, that subcontractor scorecard we talked about earlier.
Exactly. We identify those who did a great job so we can work with them again, and we also see if anyone needs some extra support or training.
So it's about building strong relationships and making sure everyone's on the same page.
Absolutely. Then comes the final step, reporting and archiving. We finalize all the reports, especially the financial ones, and we organize and store all the project documents. Drawings, contracts, reports, logs, everything.
So you create a complete record of the project.
Exactly. It's important to have all that information for future reference.
Well, it sounds like that brings us to the end of our deep dive into construction project management.
It does.
We've covered every step of the process, from the initial vision to the final handover. It's a complex and challenging field, but clearly it's also incredibly rewarding.
Oh, without a doubt. To see a project come to life, to know you were a part of creating something tangible and lasting, it's an amazing feeling.
And for anyone listening who might be interested in getting into construction, what advice would you give them?
I'd say go for it. It's a challenging but rewarding field. If you're organized, a good communicator, and enjoy working with people, you'll thrive in this industry. It's a great feeling to be a part of building something that will last for years to come.
Well said. And thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an incredible journey.
It's been my pleasure.
And for everyone listening, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into a fascinating topic. Until then, keep building those dreams.